Some of the things I look forward to during the fall of the year are the greens. Here in the South, we eat a lot of greens. And what I've learned is that I really like the flavor of lots of different kinds of greens mixed together. So today, I thought I would show you 3 different green types that I'm growing here in the garden. Before we go any further, I'd like to thank our sponsors. The garden tours are made possible by Gilbert H. Wild & Son, who've been growing beautiful perennials since 1885. Ralston Family Farms, a farm family producing delicious rice for your table. First Community Bank, whose heart is in the community, as well as Sun Patience, Super Cal Petunias, and Dragon's Breath Celosia, and Crystal Bridges, Museum of American Art. Check out my website to learn more about the brands we love. All right, so I'm out here harvesting some of these greens. This green is a mustard green, which is very flavorful. It has can have a little bit of bitterness to it, but after a frost, which we just had one last night, they become a little sweeter. The little tiny mustard greens are better, I think, if you're going to use them in a salad. These can be pretty strong, but they add a lot to this sort of mixed green approach that I like very much. One of the things that's so interesting about this family of plants is that they're very nutritious. They're full of vitamin A and K. They're good for your bone structure. They're good for your immunity, skin and hair. And I just love the flavor of them. The other thing that you should know about these is it's probably one of the easiest things you can grow. Throughout the Great Depression, the First World War, Second World War, people lived on big patches of greens of all kinds. And you could just throw the seed out on a tilled up area and the little babies come up and they mature very quickly. You can start sowing them in late August, early September. These were planted in sort of mid to late September, so they're about a month old, and I'm just harvesting them. I take a harvesting knife like this, and I'll just come along and cut some of these back, and they'll spring back like this, and I'll wash them up, and they'll be ready to prepare. One of the things that is really interesting about greens is if you'll come along and just sort of pinch the leaves like that and leave the center, just like this, with the new leaf coming out, you will preserve the plant and it'll keep producing these leaves for a long period of time. These plants can take cold, and they're not going to take like 40 below or anything like that. Not many things will, but in our mild winter area, you can eat greens all winter long typically. We've eaten collards out of this garden until the temperatures drop to like 16 degrees. And so if you can stay above that, you can enjoy these delicious and healthy plants through the winter. Now, why don't we move from the mustard greens, and I want to show you, which we eat the greens, to the turnip, which you can eat both the tops and the root part. So let's go look at purple top turnips. All right, so the turnip is, well, let me just pull one out of here. Now that is a purple top turnip. Guess how it got its name, right? So these are delicious. I love them roasted. I love them in a puree. They're very good with just a little bit of real butter and salt and just a touch of black pepper. But the green part is just as delicious. And for me, this is much milder than the mustard green. But these turnips will mature through the winter. And this one's just about a perfect size. You could quarter it, roast it. And then all the tops, these haven't gotten too mature. And typically what I would do is on these stems is I would strip this off, the leafy part, and cook that, and maybe not cook the stems, although I have taken the stems and cut them up. and sauteed them, and they're very nice. So this is some of the first turnips coming out of here, and I'm looking forward to some of these in future weeks. They mature very quickly. So I mentioned that greens are one of the easiest things you can possibly grow, and they grow very quickly. Just about, I would say, 3 weeks ago, maybe 3.5 weeks ago, these germinated down these rows. They were tiny little plants, and they've really enjoyed the early fall weather and have grown into, well, there's lots of patches of them here throughout the garden. Once we begin to take away basil and peppers and tomatoes and eggplants and things like that, we come back behind and sow these greens, so we'll have winter crops. Now, the other green I want to talk about is collard, the collard green. And these are collard leaves, and you can see they have a distinctly kind of different leaf. They're not as deeply dissected. What I mean by dissected is you can see how the cut in this leaf goes really deeply in there. These are more ovate or round like that. And to me, the collard is kind of the king. It's the sweetest of the greens, in my opinion. The mustard green, it can be identified as being very curly. This is a curly mustard green, you can see here. So they all have very distinct shapes and slightly different flavors. There's all three of those leaves together, so you can make your own analysis of how to identify them. And as I keep saying, these mixed together conspire to make something very, very delicious. So why don't we take some of these in, and let me show you one of the simplest ways to prepare them. If you love Southern cuisine, or you're a Southerner, you've no doubt heard about eating greens. And the reference usually is to turnip greens. But what I want to do is I want to talk about a couple of variations on this recipe. One, we're going to just take and do a traditional pot of greens, okay? And what you would usually have is a turnip green, which you can see right here are the turnips that we grow here in the garden. And there's some nice turnips on them, and then these, of course, are their greens. So that's the traditional pot of turnip greens. And they were usually cooked with bacon and some onion and a few other things, and we'll get to that in just a moment. What I'm going to do here is cook a pot of mixed greens. We're going to mix turnip greens along with mustard greens and collard greens. What I've done is I've brought in about 20 stems or so, a bunch of these to wash. And what I like to do is fill a sink with water, cold water, and place the greens in there. And in this case, I had mustard greens, I had collard greens, and then I had the turnip greens. And what I did is I cut the turnips off of the greens, and I'll talk about those in just a moment because I love to mix those in when I cook greens, so it's just not the greens themselves. So what I did is I let them soak. It's amazing once you take the greens out and you look at the residue, how much grit falls off of them. They're a root vegetable, obviously the turnip green is, and the leaves are close to the ground, so water splashes up under them. So it's really good to wash and make sure you get all the grit off of them. So what I have here is a colander full of 3 bunches of greens. Again, the mustard green, the collard green, and the turnip green here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this, while I've been cleaning those, what I've done is I've minced coarsely a ½ pound of bacon, and I've taken a half a red onion that I've poured in here, and I've just sauteed this again while I was washing the greens. So this is all ready. Now here's where I can deviate from the recipe. I can go all turnip greens, or I can add turnips. And what I've done over here is I've minced a bunch of these turnip roots, and so I'm just going to add those. And these just happen to be some of the small roots that I had left from washing those turnip greens. And I'm going to put those in first. And I could have put them in a few minutes ago just to soften. And I like to just cook these slowly with the greens. And I don't want to cook the turnips too much too soon because they break down. And I like for them to maintain their shape and just a little bit of texture. So I'm a big lover of turnips. If you don't like turnips, you don't have to put the turnips in here. So while these cook just a moment, let me talk to you a little bit about the alternative way of going about this. This was the way I was raised to eat greens, but now I eat healthier, so I don't use bacon. So rather than the half a pound of bacon, I'll use a half a cup of a nice olive oil or any vegetable oil. If you want to add a little more flavor, you can use a vegetable stock with them. I like garlic in mine quite a bit, and there's just some seasonings that I like to put in there with them, and they're very delicious cooked that way. And I always like to eat my greens with a little bit of vinegar, like a hot sauce, a vinegar-based hot sauce to go on them, which just brings the flavor out. So, you know, if you want to take a vegetarian approach to them, again, you can use an olive oil, about a half a cup for this recipe. You can add salt, pepper to taste. You can add a little heat to it in the way of we're going to add a little cayenne pepper here. That also gives it a little bit of a kick. Now it's best not to cook the bacon till it's crispy. You just want to soften it. Just want to get the fat distributed through there. And now I'm just going to add a couple of other things here quickly. This is about a half a cup of chicken stock. You can add as much of that as you like. I've got 1 teaspoon of red pepper. Again, this is all about what you like. And I'm just going to put a pinch of salt in there. Stir that around. Ooh, that's so nice. Wish you could get a whiff of this aroma. And then now I'm ready to put my greens in there. And they've dried through the colander. They're still a little wet. I'm just going to put these in here. And it takes a lot of these. If you've ever cooked them, you need to pick a lot of them and wash them up. And I just pack them in here. They're already cooking. You can see I try to get most of the stems off. But if they're young, tender stems, they're going to cook just fine. I picked out any yellow leaves. It's, you know, really basic stuff. You can see some of those collards there on top. There we go. Now, let's make sure everybody's on board. And I've got this on a low heat because you want to take your time and just enjoy it. It's the process, right? Okay. So I'm picking out a few of these pieces that fell through the grate. All right, so we've got everybody tucked in there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a couple of cups of water. And I'm going to watch this. Put the lid on top. And that steam will wither those leaves, as you can imagine. Got a little friend sticking out there. And I'm just going to let this cook for about 30 minutes. I'll come by and check on it. I may want to add a little more water, maybe a little more chicken stock. Take you a spoon, taste it. As soon as those turnips are tender, just stick a fork in them if they're tender. The greens are probably ready to eat. I don't like to overcook them, but I will say they're great as leftovers if you bring them out. So cook enough for a couple of messes. Well, I hope I've inspired you to get out there and sow a big patch of greens for your fall garden. If you live in a part of this country where you can grow them through the winter, you can graze on them all winter long, right up till spring, and then they bolt beautifully and have gorgeous flowers in the spring, of which you can enjoy, and the pollinators love them as well. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to like it, and make sure you subscribe to my channel. Also, I send out a weekly newsletter every Friday, so go to my website, palensmith.com, and just sign up, okay? Get out there and enjoy your garden and all the good things that come from it.